Hi, my name is Chris Boyer and I'm a graduate student at Azusa Pacific University, and for the purposes of a graduate course named PE 580, this is a discussion answering a discussion prompt, which is identify one new piece of information from my course book and 3 additional pieces of information on this topic. The chapter was named Muscular Flexibility, and this is not an area of my relative strength. So I'm excited to share with you my findings and what I learned from my course book and the articles which I discovered. So number 1 is I dug into the course book and I found that it has 4 different types of stretching identified: static, ballistic, dynamic, and proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, PNF. And so in the past, I didn't even know what ballistic was because I felt like ballistic was part of static. I've never even heard that term before, which shows you my level of expertise in stretching. When I was younger, I know that I didn't really pride myself in any way on stretching. In fact, I kind of prided myself on not stretching. And I remember some of my older friends who said how yoga saved their lives and just, yoga's amazing. And I'm like, well, okay, it's not for me. I don't like it. So then later on, I got some injuries. And so those injuries in my hips and hip flexors, quads, hamstrings. And after that, I began to stretch and I really dedicated myself to it in recovery. So this is a good not only refresher for me to remember the importance of stretching, but to begin to incorporate it to a greater degree with knowledge of what's out there in peer-reviewed studies. So I'm excited to share this with you. So in the book, under static stretching, it defined 2 different types of stretching under static, which, static, I didn't even realize there's active and passive. And when I read about it here, I realized what that meant. And I realized that I enjoy more of passive stretching than active stretching when it comes to static, because some of my favorite poses with yoga are ones that are not active poses, like the warrior pose where you're like actually having to flex like while you're doing it, versus one like pigeon where you're laying down and just relaxing and falling asleep into the position. And I like those positions a lot more. So I dug into it just to kind of think about what type of stretching do I need to dedicate myself to the most and encourage my team to do the most, or what should I spend my most time doing. And so that was the aim of my research. And one of the first article that I came across was a comparison of 2 static stretching procedures on hip adductor flexibility and strength. And so one of the common things that I've always believed for a very long time now is that static stretching actually reduces muscular strength and power. And so that's kind of a reason why I've stayed away from it. And then another reason I've stayed away from it is because I've been under the influence that a lot of people injure themselves while stretching. And so you have a great athlete and they're stretching their shoulders too much, and now they have injuries preventing them from doing the thing that they're good at. And so I know some people believe or have believed that stretching prevents an injury. I actually just was under a different mindset and I didn't believe that. And so not giving you the conclusion of what I feel about that at this point, but I want to share with you some of these insights. And here in this study, the comparison of 2 static stretching procedures on hip adductor flexibility and strength, that was interesting to me because I still got lots of hip issues that I need to resolve. So that immediately drew my attention. And in this study, it says it has been shown that acute stretching may increase flexibility, improve performance, and reduce the risk of muscle strains, but also may result in decreased maximal force output. So this confirms the idea that I had in my mind that if I'm having my athletes stretch, it should definitely not be pre-practice or pre-game, because they may have a reduced maximal force output. So if they're, we don't want to do that if they're racing, going hard, trying to shoot the ball as hard as they can, and now we're like reducing their maximal force output. So static stretching pre-game is out, and that's kind of confirmed here. And that's just in the beginning of this article, saying that there are improvements that static stretching shows to flexibility, but it reduces the maximal force output. But it goes on to say there's been little review that's been done in the most effective ways to stretch the hips. And so the conclusion of this said that neither type of static stretching resulted in reduced strength, which that was interesting to me. Because like I just said, like my understanding along with the opening of this article was that, static stretching is going to reduce your power. And here it says neither type of static stretching did reduce their strength. So maybe that's a fallacy. It goes on to say both methods minimally increased hip adductor flexibility without a decrease in force. And this suggests that individuals do not need to avoid static stretching for hip adductors prior to engaging in physical activity for fear of the strength reduction. And so this study says that. And in conclusion, they found that fitness enthusiasts and athletes don't need to shy away from acute bouts of hip adductor static stretching. And they can either use passive or active method for up to 60 seconds without fear. And so that was the result of this one. That's from the International Journal of Exercise Science. And you could find the quote for that. It's by Fagerstedt, Hammer, and Connolly. So if you want to look that one up, you can find more information about that. The next study that I looked into was actually the effect of the biomechanical effect of warm-up stretching strategies on landing mechanics in female volleyball athletes. And the reason this one drew my attention is because sometimes I do sports like surfing, skimboarding. Actually, I've gotten injured skimboarding quite a bit, which is it's like you run full out on the sand. And so because you're doing full out running, hitting waves that are moving at you, that there's just a lot, like you're turning back onto the sand with a lot of speed and velocity, and you just hitting hard. You're hit hard by the sand, stepping onto the board. There's a lot of range of motion with full extension flex going on, where you're like flexing a muscle, but you're at full extension. And so I've gotten a lot of injuries through that. But thinking about snow skiing, landing on jumps, off rails, stuff like that, that's why this also drew my attention. But this was about warm-up, and so as far as my athletes are concerned, I was interested in what the warm-up protocol was going to call for with this particular study. And so here it says female volleyball athletes incorporate dynamic and static stretching into warm-up, with evidence generally supporting dynamic stretching will improve their performance. And through this study, the results show the majority of selected landing situations are unaffected by additional static stretching, and that the non-dominant limb may be at higher risk because of it. And so in other words, like with an athlete who's, has high impact, they're jumping off the ground a lot, this particular study shows that static stretching may have a detriment to the stability of their joints and maybe a higher propensity to getting injured. So that was interesting. And then the third study that I looked into, I kind of jumped into looking for overhead throwing, because we have a lot of shoulder injuries from swimming and water polo, but specifically like throwing arm in water polo players. And so I looked into that, and I found this article about the effectiveness of mobilization with exercise versus Mulligan internal rotation, known as MWM, with stretching in patients with internal rotation deficit. So in this particular study, the thing that drew my interest again was what kind of stretching is going to be best for someone who's using an overhand throw, so that I could help my athletes to know how to prevent injury, or look for something that's going to improve their range of motion or increase maybe their shot velocity, or avoid something that could potentially reduce their shot velocity. And so this study shows that the Mulligan MWM along with stretching exercises is more effective to patients as compared to mobilization with strengthening exercises. And so what that means is like that, number one, this did not get into the static versus dynamic as far as what I read. but it introduces another concept of stretching called MWM. Now, MWM is something that I've done. I don't really do it a lot, but it's something that I don't have like a formalized education in. But it's something that you may see like someone wrap a band around their femur and they're like leaning into a stretch that you'd normally be doing for like your hip flexor. And so as you're doing this stretch and you have like a range of motion that you're working, so you're like kind of like leaning into it, doing a static stretch and coming out, but you're mobilizing and moving while placing a force in a different direction. So what this does in that particular case is it's kind of pulling your femur away in a new and different direction while you're creating that stretch. And so they do that both with the arm and placing pressure to kind of pull the arm in a different direction while it's being stretched. And so the Mulligan MWM along with stretching is more effective. And so obviously all the traditional strengthening and stretching exercises that I've known for water polo and overhead throwing, which we do a ton of like, external rotation, internal rotation movements with a band in order to basically these mobilization and strengthening techniques that we use in order to help strengthen the shoulder cuff. But now it's saying that this stretching technique, it shows a greater significance in range of motion and they have better results. And so for me, this is extremely powerful and effective. And out of these 3 studies, I think researching the Mulligan MWM is very interesting to me and something that I would like to go back and have a lot of curiosity. I'd like to continue to research this and see how to implement it, as well as just confirming the fact that dynamic stretching is really better in pregame and pre-practice. However, you don't need to really be afraid if you're doing like a 60-second hold. You don't have to be afraid that you're going to reduce your maximum power output. But if you have something that's high impact, you should be careful because you could be weakening your joint stability. You could be potentially causing more injury to yourself in a high impact sport. I would like to implement more Mulligan MWM along with some static stretching into my routine to help improve my range of motion. I'm going to stick with dynamic as pregame, but I think the Mulligan MWM may have also an added benefit to learn how to use that as pregame warm up as well. So I hope this helped you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys learned as well. You guys have a happy Thanksgiving. Take care. Bye-bye.